um, for this webinar, we have a very special webinar. First, it's our first time collaborating with another organization, Collective Success Network, to host a webinar. And so we're very excited to have Nancy join us, who will also be joining in and moderating the conversation. And we have a special guest, Gorick Ng, which of course is we'll have a proper introduction for Gorick, but really appreciate him joining in today to talk to us about the unspoken rules, secrets to starting your career off right. And you'll hear about Gorick and his his background, his history, but recently he launched this book, and that's really what the webinar today will be modeled after. And so before we get started, just also want to make a quick call out that the webinar is going to be recorded. So just FYI, if you have any friends who weren't able to join today, any colleagues, and you would like to send them the conversation after, we'll post a link on our social media so that folks can access it after. And I will go ahead and move a bit of background just on Rice first before we get started. So we can move on to the next slide. So a bit of background on Rice first. If this is your first time hearing about us or joining in on a webinar, our mission is to empower first generation and or low income students, a term that we define as FIGLY students and professionals nationwide, to achieve their full potential by providing life and career advice, support services and resources on our website, and mentorship opportunities and through our technology platform with these online tools. It's built for and by FIGLY students, so everyone who's put work into Rice First are first generation and or low income, and they gain real life business experience and professional experience as well. We're building this platform to really build on a better future for first generation low income students and professionals, and to increase the graduation rate for FIGLY students closer to 77% than the current 9%, where no FIGLY student has to navigate their path alone. So just a bit of background there on Rice First. So now I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Nancy, who's going to give a bit of background on Collective Success Network.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Lee. I'm one of the co-executive directors of the Collective Success Network. During the daytime, I'm a pharmaceutical consultant at a company called IQVIA. So if this is the first time you've heard about the Collective Success Network, we are a Philadelphia-based nonprofit, and we're here to really support, mentor, and empower the same demographics as Rice First, which is FIGLY college students. So our vision is a world where first-generation low-income college students can really define and achieve their personal and career success by really acknowledging their skills and gifts, increasing the cultural capital, which I'm sure Gorick will speak to at length later on, and also creating a supportive network. We have an in-person mentorship that has now transitioned to virtual. We also have an inclusive leadership program, and also a STEM career navigation program. So as you can see, a purpose and our mission. So we're all in alignment to really be there to support the FIGLY college students into the professional world. So with that being said, my next point is to really just share a bit of overview of the agenda today. So Gorick is, of course, our main speaker of honor, and he will be sharing a case study. Will give himself a thorough introduction, but also a case study of how could two-person entering the work world look different over the trajectory of their career, and then also some tips and tricks to help navigate the workplace. During this time, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat so the moderators can help aggregate them, but we'll be saving the questions at the end of the presentation when Gorick is done. So with that being said, I would like to formally introduce Gorick. If you haven't heard of him, he is an author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, The Unspoken Rules, Secret to Starting Your Career Off Right here. Gorick is a career advisor at Harvard College, specializing in coaching first-generation low-income students. He has worked in management consulting at Boston Consulting Group, investment banking at Credit Suisse, and is also a researcher with the Managing the Future of Work project at the Harvard Business School. He has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, the Financial Times, the New York Post, CNBC, and clearly many more. Gorick Ng, a first-generation college student, is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Business School. So you could check him out at gorick.com. So he recently published his first book, and it's really been a guide to help first-generation college students and professionals become top performers at work and ascend to the position of leadership. It is based on over 500 interviews with professionals across the world, industry, and job types. Gorick's book is quickly becoming required reading for professionals, interns, and their managers across Fortune 500 companies, startups, nonprofits around the world. So we're really lucky for him to join us today. His presentation today models that of his book. So without further ado, welcome, Gorick, and we're really excited to have you today.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Nancy. And to all the first gens who are taking time out of your Sunday afternoons, thank you so much for being here. Feels like being home among first gens. It's really special to be with a group like ours because we have this shared identity, this shared history. We're in this together. And so it means a lot for all of us to be here together today. I'm going to be sharing a presentation here, which I hope I can get some head nods to make sure that you all can see it in full screen. I see some head nods, fantastic. As Nancy and David so generously mentioned, I just released a new book with Harvard Business Review Press called The Unspoken Rules, Secrets to Starting Your Career Off Right. You can check out the first 25 pages on my website, which is gorick.com. You can also pick it up wherever books are sold. Nancy was so generous in her introduction. I'll give you the personal introduction, which you may not see on a place like LinkedIn. So I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, here on the pin. My mom was a first generation immigrant to Canada. She left school when she was 12 years old to support her brothers through school. She spent most of her life working in a sewing machine factory. And when I was 14 years old, I learned to write my first resume. Wasn't for me, it was actually for her when she was laid off. I, as the person who knew how to get onto the internet, who knew English, became the person to look for cover letter and resume templates, to look for jobs online, and to click send repeatedly. I mention all of this not because I was successful, but because I was actually unsuccessful. We spammed hundreds of employers and ended up getting 0 callbacks. And it was really that experience so early on that cemented within me this idea that there's so much that school doesn't teach you about how to build a successful career. And so many of these hidden expectations are passed down from parent to child or from mentor to mentee. You need someone in your life who's been there, done that, and who can share some of this tacit knowledge with you, this hidden curriculum of sorts that is informal and that's conveyed over the dinner table and not from a chalkboard to students sitting in the classroom. And it was actually this very line of thinking that led to me becoming, after high school, a first-generation college student at Harvard. I actually met a student at another school who had applied and gotten into Yale University. And she taught me that there was so much more to getting into college than what is written on these college applications websites. College Collective Success and Rise First are doing such a great job of helping first-gen low-income students navigate so many of these unspoken rules. I was lucky to have someone like that in my life. And without this person, I wouldn't have made it to a place like Harvard. Now, I got into Harvard, yes, but it was also just the beginning of the unspoken rules. I remember this time in college when I was walking home from the library. I was working on a prom set in the library and I was on my way home. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I was wearing my backpack, and walking in the other direction were a bunch of other students who were taking the same class. However, they were dressed in suits and ties and they were walking in the opposite direction. Turns out, I found this out the next day, that they were actually off to an invite-only recruiting event. And it was put on by an employer that had come onto campus and had set up a table at a job fair. I went to this job fair, but when I showed up, ended up picking up some of the free swag, ended up walking away and really didn't think much of the situation. Turns out that there were a set of students who were navigating these job fairs very differently from me. They weren't just looking at the swag, they were looking at the people, and they were speaking to them, selling themselves, doing research behind the scenes, networking behind the scenes. And so fast forward a couple of weeks, I ended up walking away with some stickers, a notebook, a pen, and a water bottle, whereas these other students walked away with internships. And it was at this point that I realized that even though I was at a place like Harvard, the unspoken rules had only just begun, that it wasn't just about getting into college, it was about getting through college and building the successful career. And so what I did was I took the strategy that I had applied when I applied to college. I looked left, I looked right, I modeled after the people who seemed to know what they were doing, and it ended up working. I ended up getting an internship at Credit Suisse in New York as an investment banking analyst, followed by a full-time job at Boston Consulting Group as a management consultant. And when I was there, I started realizing that even then, the unspoken rules had only just begun. Here's a picture I took late at night in the office. You can see that it was only me there. I pulled a lot of late nights in my first job, and I was one of the very few who ended up working this late into the night. I was stressed. I was not doing the right work. I was not doing it the right way, and I felt alone. But luckily, after having gone through the college admissions process and the unspoken rules of getting a job, I started realizing something, that even though I felt like this dog, not having an idea of what I was doing, that I don't know what I don't know, but others know. And I simply had to go out there, find these people, interview them, learn from them. And that's what I did. I ended up spending actually the last 5 years interviewing over 500 people across different industries and job types. And after 3 years of writing, I released this new book with Harvard Business Review called The Unspoken Rules: Secrets to Starting Your Career Off Right. And I'm seeing here in the chat that Camilla is encouraging everyone to introduce themselves. I would love to get to know you all. So please, 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 not only just introduce yourself in the chat, but I would encourage you all to react to anything I'm saying. Is this resonating with you? Do you have any questions? Let's make this an interactive session so that it's not just me being a talking head and talking in one way. Let's make this interactive. Hello, Ashley, and hello, David, and hello, Angela, Ashley, so many of you. I'm thrilled to have you all participating in the chat. So let's move on with the presentation here and talk to you about two individuals, person A and person B. On the y-axis, I have promotability, which is a fancy way of saying how likely you are to be promoted, which could mean taking on more responsibilities, building trust with your coworkers, getting invited to things, and if you're interested in converting your internship into a full-time job, your likelihood of doing so. Or if you are in a full-time job already, your ability to ascend to a position of leadership, which I know all of you have the ability to do. On the x-axis, on the horizontal line, I have tenure, which is a fancy way of saying how long you've been at the company or organization or nonprofit or internship or apprenticeship. And so I start this off actually before your first day, let's say -10. And I move all the way to, let's say, 2 years. Now, this isn't to scale. So this could extend to 5 years, it could extend to 10 years, it could extend to just 6 or 8 weeks, depending on where you are in your career, if you're in an internship or a full-time job. And I want to show you these two people to show how one person may navigate the environment of work very differently from another person and how they might end up with different outcomes. I happen to relate a little bit more to person B, but I know we all have the potential to navigate these spaces like a person A. Let's talk about what this looks like. So person A may have had some social capital, which isn't always in our control, but there are certain things that are in our control, which we'll talk about later on, where this person may have gotten introduced to this company and may have gotten introduced to a colleague at this company before they even show up. And so from this individual, they were able to learn the inner workings of this organization before they even show up. They're able to be aware of who's who cares about what. And so as a result, they show up on the first day looking and sounding like an insider. And they're looking competent, as if they've done this job before, as if they belong. And so by the second day, maybe they're now bonding with a manager over their favorite vacation spot, something that is difficult as a first gen and that I can relate to. So we're going to come back to this a little bit later on, but person A was able to really just fit in right away. And so starts building an ally early on. So by the time day 10 rolls around, maybe they're so well connected at this point that they're able to find other alums from their school who are in this work environment as well. So from this conversation, they learn about what they should be putting in a presentation. And so they exceed expectations and they're able to build another ally at this organization. From one person, they meet another person and they get invited to someone's after work social and they meet another higher up. So now you can see that this is really now starting to snowball to the point where they're maybe following up with people, sending thank you emails, setting up coffee chats and phone calls. And so they're meeting more higher ups. And along the way, finding people who are able to take person A under their wings and show them around, show them how to navigate these unfamiliar spaces. So their confidence is building now as well. So they're having enough confidence and awareness of what's going on. So they're speaking up in meetings and doing so confidently, which then catches the attention of even more higher ups. At this point, maybe they're getting invited to higher profile assignments. So by the time 2 years rolls around, they have no issue getting promoted. Now, let's talk about someone like person B who ends up having a different trajectory. Maybe this person wasn't connected to this organization, so applied through the front door. And so also wasn't aware of what they should be researching before their first day, so didn't do very much at all. Maybe they show up on their first day a little bit overdressed or underdressed, in which case they're looking and maybe even feeling like an outsider rather. Maybe they don't feel as comfortable in this work environment, so they're staying quiet. They're staying quiet not because they don't have anything to say, but because they aren't feeling quite as at home as person A. But people can't read person B's mind, so person B comes across as if they're disengaged. Maybe when they receive their first assignment, they're smiling and nodding, as I did so many times, even though they had no idea what was going on. And when they were smiling and nodding, they just wanted to get that meeting over with, as I had done so many times before. And then they go back and they start working and they realize, oh, wow, I have actually no idea what I'm doing. And when they hand in their assignment, it turns out that it's nothing like what their manager wanted. So their manager's now maybe getting a little bit concerned and starting to micromanage them. So whereas person A was able to really build a relationship with their manager, this person starts having a very different relationship and maybe even starts dreading their work. They continue working, but they're doing so now starting to get a little bit more frustrated. And they're staying quiet, they're looking disengaged, and they're looking at someone like person A and wondering, wait, how is it that person A is able to navigate this place so effectively? They're getting pulled in all these meetings, they're speaking up so confidently. What's really going on? But unfortunately, before they were able to even get to the 2-year mark, they end up leaving. Now, this is a pretty stark contrast between a person A and a person B. And I deliberately didn't put a name to this because these are two extremes. It's very unlikely that any of us are going to be like someone like person A or person B, but it's helpful to look at these extremes, these bookends, to see what it might look like at the extremes. And I want as many of you as possible to be able to identify circumstances where you might have an opportunity to be like a person A. And if you find yourself in a person B, to know how these experiences might be leading to each other and how success in the workplace is really a snowball effect where one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And there's all this invisible work that's happening where we may only see day 0 and day 600, but there's so much that individuals are doing along the way that we may not be able to observe. Things like what person A was able to do. Now, I put a lot of onus on the individual, which is important to some degree, but I also want to recognize that not everything is going to be in our control, right? So there is bias, there is discrimination. There is going to be an unlevel playing field between someone like person A and person B. And so I don't want to discredit that at all. And I really want to call it out, especially if there are any managers in the room who are thinking about how to better engage their employees. Because someone like person A, may have just started off with an unlevel playing field that was tilted in their favor versus someone like person B. But at the same time, as individuals, I also want to empower you to be able to navigate these spaces, even if the level playing field isn't quite level in your favor. So what's going on here when it comes to person A versus person B? When I take a step back from all of my interviews, I start realizing that there are 3 C's to be keeping in mind: competence, commitment, and compatibility. And the idea is this: when you show up in the workplace, whether it's through a resume, cover letter, interview, first day in the job, client meeting, etc., the people around you are sizing you up and they're asking themselves 3 questions. Question 1 is, can you do your job well, which is competence. Question 2 is, are you excited to be here, which is commitment. And question 3 is, do you get along with us, which is compatibility. So competence, commitment, compatibility, the 3 C's. Your job, all of our jobs, is to convince the people around us to answer yes to all 3 questions all the time to get to the center of this Venn diagram. So what does this look like? Well, when we think about the trajectories of person A and person B, we can start thinking about the invisible work that someone like person A was able to do that set them up for success on day 0, on week 1, on month 1, and beyond. And as I think about where my book comes in, today we're going to talk about day 0, week 1, and month 1, and some of my favorite highlights and tips that you can apply to your summer internship this summer. And if you're working already, to hopefully accelerate your career. But there's going to be a lot more that we won't have a chance to cover, which I would love for you all to contribute in the Q&A. And if you're interested, of course, feel free to consider picking up my book and checking out the rest, especially on the Beyond section on how to go from just setting yourself up in the early stages to then accelerating your career. So let's talk about what's going on at these 4 stages, or really 3 stages here. So the first is person A is doing their background research. They're embracing networking calls. They're stalking their coworkers, and they are reflecting on what they want. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on each of these. So that on week 1, they're knowing the expectations, they're sparking conversations, and by month 1, they're able to take ownership and stay on track so that over time, they're able to show their potential. So what do each of these 4 2 steps look like? Let's dive in. On the background research front, one of my favorite activities growing up was a flip book called Mad Libs, where you can fill in the blanks and complete a story. Well, when I think about the research that you can do before your interview and before your first day in the job, you can actually do Mad Libs as well, where you can fill in the following blanks. Blank 1 is my employer/client helps these people do these things by these methods. Blank number 2 is recently my employer/client has been pursuing these initiatives for these reasons. Blank number 3 is my employer/client competes with these organizations because of these reasons. And you could also imagine that blank number 3 could be evolved into something like this organization partners with these organizations or works with these organizations. Now, take a moment here. If you haven't yet started your internship, think about whether you can fill in these blanks and try filling it out for yourself. And if you're currently in a job, think about how you might fill these out. What I start realizing about someone like person A is they're able to fill these out. They're not bringing this as homework for someone to show their manager, but they're keeping these blanks in the back of their heads because this will enable you to have higher level, more strategic conversations that is often not reserved for someone like an intern. Often when we think about an internship, we think of someone who just shows up, does their work, and goes home. However, the more you can see the big picture in the same way that your managers and managers can do, the more you'll be able to participate in conversations like the higher ups. What person A was also doing was embracing networking calls. In my book, I have a story of someone who had 7 rounds of interviews before they got hired. And so by that point, they were super tired. They were thinking, I didn't even have questions when I was at my first interview. You've asked me if I had any questions at the last moment of every interview so far. I've asked 7 questions. I don't have any more questions. Leave me alone. And So when someone reached out to them and said, hey, congratulations on getting this job offer, let me know if you have any questions, this individual didn't embrace any of these phone calls. And so as a result, ended up foregoing this opportunity to build relationships. However, over time, this person realized actually in their second and third job that these were actually hidden opportunities to build relationships behind the scenes before you even show up. And so if you end up having people reach out to you from your new employer, embrace that opportunity. It's a freebie for you to be like a person A. So here's a template of something you can send in response. Hi, Ellen. Thanks so much for reaching out. I'd love to chat further. Do any of the following times work? All times Eastern time, or whatever time zone your email sender is from. Here's my availability. Best regards, Gorick. What are you doing here? What you're doing here is you're embracing that opportunity, but you're doing so and making the other person's life easy by offering your availability. That way, all they have to do is just pick a time and you're all set. And that's all it takes. You'll get on the phone, you'll chat with them, you'll ask some questions about expectations for your role and how they've liked their job and any advice they have for you. And boom, you've built another relationship and you've set yourself up to more effectively navigate your new work environment. Stalking your coworkers. As fellow first gens, it's often not easy to build relationships at work because your coworkers may be talking about the cottage they have, the fancy summer vacation they had. When I was first showing up in my first internships and jobs, people were talking about the sports teams they were a part of and the fancy musical instruments they had and the lessons they had growing up, none of which my family had the resources to pay for. And so in these opportunities, I really stayed quiet and I didn't have all that much to contribute. However, what I started realizing was people like person A, even if they don't have all that much in common, they're still able to dig for little things that can build their compatibility, one of these 3 C's. What are they doing? They're looking at whether someone has the same educational background, similar extracurricular activities, similar hometowns, similar prior experiences, and similar interests. And what these people are doing is going on LinkedIn and stalking their coworkers and looking at whether this person can either see them as a younger version of themselves or a mirror image of them, or really just anything that would be able to help them break the ice when they show up. They don't necessarily have to say, hey, I stalked you, but being able to say, oh, I'm also from Houston, or I'm from Houston, and letting the other person say, oh yeah, I'm from Houston too. That's a really great opportunity for you to turn someone who's otherwise a stranger into an acquaintance. And that's where you can turn someone from an acquaintance to an ally and beyond. Now, this is something that person A was able to also do. That's invisible work, which is reflect on what they want from this experience. I remember when I was going through the internship process and participating in extracurricular activities, I did a lot of the things I did because I thought it was interesting. That was really about it. However, what I didn't realize is that there's an opportunity to really get more out of every experience than what they may offer to you explicitly. And so something to keep in mind as you start your internships this summer is asking yourself, what does success look like? If I think ahead to the end of this opportunity at the end of the summer, what do I want to have achieved? What do I want to have on my resume? What verbs do I want to be able to write down? What nouns do I want to write down on my resume? And what do I want to be able to show? Who do I want to impress for an upcoming job? What do I want to learn? What topics do I want to be exposed to? What skills do I want to acquire? And who do I want to meet? Is there someone that I'm interested in maybe becoming my graduate school recommendation letter writer? Is there someone that I would love to maybe turn into a mentor? What I learned from this experience is that a job is so much more than just the money, especially as first gens, the money matters. But it's also not the only thing that a job, internship, extracurricular activity, apprenticeship, co-op, et cetera, is able to offer. It's a stepping stone. So it's not so much about your first job, it's about your second job and your third job and your 10th job, because all of these things in the same way that person A was able to do really accumulates over time. And moreover, I have yet to meet anyone who is early in their career who really knows what they want to do with their lives. And that's okay, that's normal. I'm still trying to figure it out myself. However, every experience is an opportunity to test a hypothesis about yourself of what do I like, what do I not like, what am I passionate about, what am I not passionate about, what gives me energy, what doesn't give me energy, what types of people do I want to work with and not want to work with. Your first job, if you don't end up enjoying it, that's okay. In fact, I'll be honest, I don't really care. As long as you learn something about yourself, you'll be able to make that much more of an informed decision as you go along. It's kind of like going grocery shopping. You'll be much more likely to walk out with the grocery items you want if you show up with a mental checklist or even a physical checklist. So all of this is invisible work before your first day. Now let's talk about what you can do in your first week, first day, and beyond. One thing that I learned along the way, also the hard way, was that managing is a tough job. That my manager, even though they're called a manager, managing me is only a part of their job. They're also managing other people. They're also managing other departments, their own manager, etc. And so even the most caring managers can come across as uncaring when they're busy. And so when my manager isn't available to manage me, it's important for me to manage my manager. And this involves asking questions and providing structure to an otherwise ambiguous situation. So here are a couple of questions to ask your manager if they don't offer this information to you. What tasks and deliverables are top priorities in my role? What should I be able to do by the first 3 months, 6 months? Is there anyone else you'd suggest I speak to so that you can meet additional people who can help you navigate this new environment? And what should day-to-day and week-to-week collaboration look like between us? And is there an opportunity for us to maybe pencil in a check-in, whether it's at the end of every week or whatever aligns best with your schedule? Notice what you're doing here. You are essentially offering your manager the chance to put some structure around your interaction. That way, if they're too busy to manage you, you'll at least have expectations around, okay, I'm going to check in with you at the end of every week, or I'll send you an update email. And you'll avoid doing something that someone I interviewed, a first-gen software engineer at a big tech company. This individual didn't have any touch points with their manager. And so it wasn't clear to this individual that their ability to turn their internship into a full-time offer was dependent upon their ability to finish a certain summer project. This person ended up volunteering for everything, ended up joining a lot of meetings, meeting a lot of people, which was great, and everyone loved her. But at the end of the summer, she didn't realize that, she actually didn't do all that much for the summer project, which was really what mattered. And so even though her manager was nice and friendly to her all throughout the summer, her manager was secretly thinking, oh man, you're so slow. Why are you not getting your job done? And so unfortunately, this person didn't end up getting a return offer because they didn't do what was core to their job. They were too busy doing all this other stuff. And I want you to, of course, avoid that scenario. Sparking conversations. This is where we as first gens really need to do more, just as much as I hope managers can do more to create more inclusive spaces for all of us. And a lot of this has to do with some of the first week stalking that I talked about, where, especially in remote work, I noticed that someone earlier had mentioned, I believe it was Dan earlier, who brought up the question of how COVID has affected this. I know that, let me actually come back to Dan, but Dan's question about or thought about COVID has really prompted this idea of, well, how do you build these relationships when you're working in a remote work environment where you're not able to bump into your coworkers as easily? Well, one opportunity that's a hidden opportunity is to join meetings early and to use those 3 to 5 minutes to just small talk with your coworkers, ask about their day, ask about their work. This is an opportunity to turn someone that you may not know into someone that you at least are friendly with. And that's where it all begins. If you don't have anything else to talk about, if you can't talk about their summer vacation homes, ask about their work, show interest in what they're doing and ask them what they're working on. Or just ask the questions in general, where you can say, well, I've never been to this particular place before. What's it like? What recommendations do you have? Remembering details like, oh, it sounds like you were on a trip last weekend or you went to a wedding. How was that? And finally, repeating your first day stalking. So you have a little bit more information on someone so you can ask more thoughtful questions about their background that can allow you to now build that relationship. Now, so much of what we talked about is about building relationships, but of course, it's also just as important to get the job done and do so effectively. And here, there's an idea of ownership, which is a foreign concept that managers love to toss around, but that they never quite explain. Taking ownership is all about pretending as if you own your project, as if there's no one else to be able to help you out, and it's you who's in charge of managing this process all the way through. So what does this look like? Well, when you're given an assignment, often managers, even the most caring managers, may not know what you don't know. And so they might just say to you, hey, can you look into this? In which case it may make sense to them that you're supposed to do this research and come back to them with an email, but it may not be clear to you. And when I think about what I did, I would go off, write this elaborate book report, come back and realize my manager really just wanted me to do a 5-second Google search. So in order to avoid spending 5 hours on something that could have taken 5 minutes, it's important to understand the what, the how, and the by when. So what do you need to do? How do you need to do it? By when do you need to do it? What do you need to do? Should you just take a template and update the numbers? How do you need to do it? Do you need to talk to someone and ask for their input? Should you get it done? And then finally, on the by when, should you get it done by this afternoon? Or is there a meeting happening this afternoon, in which case you need to get it done sooner than that so your manager can check your work? Because if you don't ask the what, the how, and the by when, you'll do the wrong work, do it the wrong way, or not do it on time. And then one of the things that I also learned is that coming back to this idea of there being a meeting this afternoon, every time you get a deadline at work, often it is the final deadline. There's actually an invisible deadline, which is before the final deadline. So in the case of there being a meeting this afternoon, it's not enough to just hand in your work 5 minutes before that meeting. If your manager wants to see it at noon, you now have to get it to them before noon, so they have a time to review. So asking them when would it make sense to check in can avoid a lot of the hassles and heartache that I ended up having, where I would miss deadlines just because they weren't explicitly told to me. The third thing that really separates the high performers from the mediocre performers is staying one step ahead of your boss. So putting yourself in the shoes of your boss and asking yourself, what are they going to ask me for? And having it at the ready. And what are they going to ask me about? And having the answer before they even ask. Staying one step ahead of your boss or your manager can help you avoid getting stressed out and looking potentially clueless, even though you could have very well, even though I know all of you are not clueless. And then finally, staying on track. One of the things that was sad about some of these interviews that I conducted was people not knowing how they were doing and having managers who were not confrontational enough to really tell them what they needed to hear and instead telling them what they wanted to hear. So if you're not getting enough feedback, which is often a problem that people encounter in the workplace, ask for it. Of course, sometimes your manager may be so gentle and polite that they might be thinking one thing and telling you another, in which case you consider asking, what should I start doing, stop doing, or keep doing? Or just simply saying, am I on track? This was actually something that software engineer told me, which was if I had told my manager or asked my manager if I'm on track, he would have told me, no, you're not on track. And I would have maybe even kept this internship and turned it into a full-time job. Now, I've tossed a lot at you, and this is only just in the first few weeks. There's a lot more that will be required to go from entry-level employee to manager, which I know all of you have the potential to become, and that I'm really passionate about enabling you to become. Because the more we can have folks from diverse backgrounds, and especially diverse socioeconomic backgrounds in positions of leadership, the more we can create diverse work environments that are going to work for everybody, so that the next generation of first-gen low-income college students will have a smoother path to career success. And so I'm really passionate about this for this reason, but I also don't want you to think about your job as just a short-term opportunity, because this is, as I said earlier, really just a stepping stone into something more, something better. So I want to leave you with this quote, which is that your job may be temporary, but your relationships, your skills, your really everything that you're getting outside of the money is going to last a lifetime. And so I have thought a lot recently, this isn't in my book, but I thought a lot recently about the idea of different forms of capital. And when we think of capital, we think of money. And when we think of money, we think, okay, I'm going to work to get a job, or rather, I'm going to work to make money. However, there's another form of currency as well, another form of capital, which is your time. And you all, as early career professionals, have a lot of time. Time to experiment, time to learn, time to build your career. There's also 3 additional forms of capital that someone like person A was able to appreciate and really build and have become the snowball effect. And these are human capital, so what you can do, social capital, which is who you know, and reputational capital, which is who knows you and for what reason. And so as you take the long view, it's important to think about these other forms of capital, which you're accumulating or depleting over time, whether you like it or not. And so think about all that we talked about in these first couple of weeks. Really take advantage of these hidden opportunities and become the leader, the change maker that you all have the potential to become. I now want to pivot over to Q&A, but before I do so, I want to share with you 4 ways for us to stay in touch and to continue the conversation. The first is to come onto my website, which is gorick.com. You can download the first 25 pages of my book by entering your email address. And on the website, you can also subscribe to my email newsletter, which I have not yet started, but that I will be releasing shortly to provide regular career tips. If you enjoyed this webinar, if you enjoyed this topic, please tell a friend about this book and about me. And if you're connected to any nonprofits, to your college, to any advising programs, to your employer, where you feel like there's someone else who could be interested in this book and topic and work, forward me along, refer me along. And finally, I would love to stay in touch on the topic of social capital, on the topic of person A able to really leverage all of these relationships. Well, consider me a part of your circle now. So add me on LinkedIn and please, please, please stay in touch. Consider us family. I consider it as such. And now let's pivot over to the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Gorick, thank you so much. This conversation has honestly been just hearing you talk about your experiences and kind of the difference between person A and person B. I can definitely attest to feeling like a person B in certain environments and certain time periods throughout my college career and also now in my full-time career. So thank you so much. We've got some really great questions here prepared, and questions that have been sent over by folks. And as a reminder, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A and upvote your favorite question. We'll try to answer as many of these. Also, Gorick, if I want to ask for your permission, if you're fine with stepping maybe 5 minutes over our scheduled time, if you're available to answer any lingering questions, would really appreciate.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to stay for as long as it takes.
Awesome, wonderful. So I'll go ahead and ask the first question, and Nancy and I will go back and forth in asking you some questions. So this first question says, "Hi, Gorick. I'm a person B without ever having realized it. I am also a first-gen grad of immigrant parents and didn't know about these unspoken rules. But I'm now 10 years in a big bank, 30 years old, and seeing younger people having more success than me, person A's. Do you have any advice for people who are already into their careers? Is it too late?"
Anonymous attendee plus the 6 people who upvoted. I think it's clear that you are not alone just from all the upvotes and this having risen to the top. I believe really strongly that where you start off does not have to dictate where you end up. And this is true in your current position in your current company, but also in the grand scheme of things where, let's say, for example, you're interested in, let's say, leaving finance and leaving this big bank and going somewhere else. Well, I've seen, if you think of 2 professions, banking and product management, you can probably find people who are going in opposite directions, which really indicates to me that we're all in the search of where we best fit and what career path we're going to find most fulfilling. And so I wouldn't really consider yourself, 30 years old is very young in the grand scheme of your career. It's definitely not too late. There are plenty of people who, let's say, leave medical school and enter a big bank. There are many people who go from a big bank to medical school. There are lawyers who become, who end up getting a PhD. There are PhDs who end up working in tech. So many people going in opposite directions and different directions that you will get there. It just depends on when you get there. Now, when it comes to the advice part, what I would say is it's helpful to diagnose which of these 3 C's, and more specifically, which subsets of these 3 C's you are most struggling with. It's hard for me to do this without knowing your full set of circumstances. And I'd hate to turn this into a book promotion sort of opportunity, but do consider checking out the book and seeing which chapters and which scenarios you've been struggling with. Because I don't want to turn this into a book promotion opportunity, I do also want to just say that it's helpful to look around and observe the patterns of the coworkers around you. What is the hidden work that these other young people that you mentioned are doing that may be accelerating their career path? Are they building relationships with higher ups? Are they strategically signing up for more important responsibilities that may not have necessarily been advertised? Are they speaking up more in meetings and doing so confidently? Are they getting themselves invited to other meetings? Are they going to their manager with proposals on new ideas versus just waiting for assignments to be handed to them? Are they showing a sense of urgency of responding to emails promptly, really pushing the team forward? Are they being visible? Are they not just doing the work, but being associated with a certain type of work? Are they bringing in outside information? Maybe they're sending white papers, reports, they're doing extra research online, and they're forwarding it along to their team to show that they're competent and staying up to date on what's going on. I just named about half a dozen different things that people could be doing in a situation like this. It can be helpful to just simply mirror what they're doing and see how it works for you. Of course, those are things that you may not be doing that you could be doing. There are also things that maybe you're not doing, and there are also things that you could be doing, but that may be holding you back. So I'm thinking of one area that becomes quite a sticking point, especially for women and people of color, is this idea of office housework, which is a fancy way of saying there's promotable tasks at work and non-promotable tasks at work. Promotable tasks are things that are core to your job and that the higher ups care about, things that often will make the team and company operate better, faster, cheaper, and that are going to get noticed by the higher ups. Meanwhile, there are going to be other tasks that may help the team, but that may not get you promoted. And if you search for office housework or non-promotable tasks, you'll find a lot of research done by organizational psychologists. Things like taking notes in meetings or organizing the holiday party. And some of these types of tasks are helpful, but often they fall upon women and people of color. And so if you happen to be in a situation like that, it can be helpful to try and maybe find some more urgent and more important things to be aligning yourself to, so that you can maybe shed some of that work and potentially align yourself with work that the higher ups care about. So I gave you a bunch of sort of general ideas. I don't know if any of them are necessarily helpful for your situation, but those are the first things that I think about as someone who may feel like others are getting ahead over you and more faster than you. I'm also happy to continue the conversation offline if you want to reach out.
Great. Thank you, Gorick. It's great that you pointed out that multiple people upvoted, so probably a bunch of people feeling the same way. But I also want to add, even if this is not necessarily book promotions, if the attendees could stay till the end, actually, you can have a chance to win a book if you take the survey that we'll send out at the end of this event. So keep an eye out in your email. And these are specifically for students. So students, if you want a book, take the survey and we'll love to have your input. Now on to the next question, Gorick. This is from the other side of the spectrum, from a student. So the first question is from a professional, a seasoned professional. Now this is from a person who's starting out. Let's say you have the 3 C's, but you feel insecure, maybe because there's a low GPA or poor transcripts or grades. How would you find ways to sell yourself given what you have?
Yeah, so the idea of insecurity is one that really is one I hear a lot, and I've felt a lot as a first gen, where there's this imposter syndrome of not feeling like you're ready, even though you might be. And when I think about, let me answer this in 2 ways. One in general, and then the other in terms of the low GPA that you're talking about. In general, something I started noticing as I look at people like person A versus person B is that there's a difference between confidence and competence. And the two are often conflated, where confidence is how good you think you are, and it's performative, whereas competence is how much you know and how good you really are. Now, the two often get conflated because perceptions don't always equal reality, where if you look at a team meeting, for example, you might have someone who's the loudest talking, longest rambling person and who may sound super confident, but when you dig into what they're saying, it's not all that substantive at all. Meanwhile, the people who are staying quiet may have more of the answers, may have a better idea of what's going on, but who may not be speaking up. And so just knowing that so many of us tend to mix the two up can be a starting point. Now, I want to address the low GPA part, which is that it's all about the story you want to tell. And it also depends on what industry you're in. So if you're, for example, looking at the consulting industry, there are going to be some minimum GPAs where they're often going to be looking for people with above a 3.7 GPA. If you want to go to law school, GPA matters. Medical school, GPA matters. However, for a lot of other industries, there are going to be other cutoffs. For example, a lot of large organizations will have a cutoff of, let's say, a 3.5 GPA. What I think about when I think of GPA is, in the grand scheme of your resume, it's only one line. So think about the one page that's your resume. That's one number on one line. 90% of the rest of that document contains everything else. It contains your major, contains your school, contains your extracurricular activities, contains your prior work experience. And so I wouldn't think too much about that one number, because there are going to be things you can change, as in there may be ways you can boost that GPA if you still have semesters left. So that's within your control, but there's not much that you're going to be able to change looking back. You're not necessarily going to redo college just to get a higher GPA, nor should you, because when employers are looking at your resume and looking at your candidacy, what are they really looking for? They're looking for someone who's able to do the job. And when they're looking at someone who can do the job, they don't know who can do the job. So all they can look at are proxies for how well it might seem like you can perform. And so, yes, an employer might look at your GPA and say, well, if you're good enough to get a 3 whatever GPA, you must be good enough for us. Or if you're good enough for this major, you must be good enough for us. Or if you're good enough for this college, you must be good enough for us. But at the same time, they're also going to be looking at your work experience and perhaps even weighing that more, where, oh, if you got this internship and you did well in it and it looks like you really contributed, you look like you're someone who's competent, who's committed, who's compatible. Even more so, and you're going to be able to communicate so much more of that through your work experience than through your GPA. I'll tell you a personal side of things where I knew that I was not going to have the highest GPA in college. And so what I did strategically was really drown out my GPA by getting as many work experiences as possible. I signed up for a lot of leadership activities, signed up for internships, got involved, got internships in the winters, in the summers, sometimes got multiple internships. And so by the end, my resume actually ended up looking better than someone who had, let's say, a 3.9 GPA, because all they had was that one number. I had so much more on that resume. So the more your GPA may be on the lower side, the more then of an opportunity you have to drown it out with leadership, with work experience. And also, I wouldn't discount the value of networking, where just because you might be below the cutoff doesn't mean you're completely disqualified. It's ultimately people behind the scenes who are going to be making these decisions. So if you don't think you are in the safe zone with your GPA, find someone who can introduce you to someone or reach out to them cold. And if you can build that compatibility and convince them of your competence and your commitment over the phone or over video chat, they may not even remember what your GPA is. And there are, quite frankly, a lot of people who decide to not even include their GPA on their resume because they want to show how competent, committed, and compatible they are without the distraction of a number on a piece of paper.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Gorick. Our next question is around first impressions. So the person who asked this question says, first impressions are very hard to break. If you started out as a person B in a company, would it be easier to find a new company or start out as a person A?
Yeah, that's an important question, and I would say two things. So when I think of the signals you send at work, certainly first impressions matter, and first impressions can be enduring, but it also depends on what people remember as your pattern of behavior. So I'll give you an example of, someone who shows up late. Actually, I heard this from a manager where if you show up late once, especially early on, it's important to drown out that first impression by being on time and early for the next 10 meetings. And so if you can drown out that prior first impression, you may not even have to speak a word about your change in behavior. You just have to change that behavior to turn things around. Another thing to think about, if it's not on the punctuality side, but it's on something else, could be for you to have a conversation with your manager about, hey, I was reflecting upon my performance in this and that area, and I feel like I could be better at this and that. I'd love to work with you to see how I could make this work. And so having that conversation with your manager also depends a lot on the type of manager you have and how supportive they are, but that could also be an avenue. The third is to find allies on your team, someone who may not hopefully see you as a threat, who is invested in your career, and ask for their input on how you can navigate the situation, because every situation is going to be a little bit different. And then, of course, in my book, I have this idea of, do you live with your situation? Do you try and fix your situation? Or do you decide to leave your situation? And so far, I've talked a lot about primarily fixing your situation, drowning out those prior first impressions, as well as acknowledging those first impressions and demonstrating and really signaling to people that you're aware of it and are eager to improve is one option. But sometimes, yes, it may be time to start from scratch or start anew with a different environment, in which case that is definitely an opportunity. And I think to the anonymous attendee from earlier, I don't know how old you are, I don't know where you are in your career, but there are a lot of companies out there, there are a lot of positions out there. Your first job won't be your last job. And even if this is your fifth job probably likely won't be your last job either. So there's always an opportunity to start again.
Great. Thank you, Gorick. So this one is now referring back to person A and B now, but continuing the trajectory, so to speak. So when you're person A, you kind of reach that peak. We notice that your graph ends, right? So how do you then manage the anxiety or the fear of like, wow, I might be falling behind or, not be able to sustain this? And I think this is a two-part question in a way, because it also talks about Figley, right? And our relationship to authority and feeling like, wow, I'm disappointing or not meeting that person's expectation, the senior manager and senior leadership.
Yeah. So, I think this is actually, I actually struggled with this a lot when I was creating the graph, because to illustrate, I was showing this linearity to this, and I was showing this very smooth path for someone like person A, when really, again, this is on the extreme. It's unlikely that anyone, goes through it in as smooth a way as person A. And there is definitely going to be, to your point, anonymous attendee, of this anxiety around, wow, I've done so well. What if I fail? And I wonder if this is also maybe a matter of confidence versus competence, where if you have had this trajectory of being someone like person A, clearly you've been able to demonstrate that where you start off as a Figley person doesn't have to dictate where you end up. It may, however, over time require that you unlearn and relearn some of these unspoken rules. So as time goes on, you're going to move increasingly into the territory of maybe bending some of these rules. So when you're first starting off, so much of what your job is about is showing that you can do what you promised you would do, showing attention to detail, being able to execute. However, over time, as you invisibly graduate from what I call learner mode to leader mode, the more you're going to have to contribute to meetings, to drive conversations, to bring in outside information, to really push the agenda forward, to not just show your performance, but to also show your potential. I'd like to think that the later parts of my book can hopefully help with that, of getting yourself into the mindset of, oh, wow, it's not just about doing my job now, it's about driving the team forward. When it comes to leveling down to someone like person B, I also try and think about where your personal ambitions may be. So one of the things that I also think a lot about here is, in the context of trajectory A and trajectory B, I've put a lot of emphasis on the idea of getting promoted. But that's just one of many aspirations. Your aspirations can be to, yes, get promoted. It could be to make an impact. It could be to have a work-life balance that works for you. It could be to do fulfilling work. It could be to have fruitful relationships with your coworkers. And so I think thinking back to the self-reflection exercise earlier can be helpful there of, hey, what does success look like to you? Maybe success doesn't necessarily mean making it all the way up to the top. And if it is, I'm sure you can do it. If you don't want to, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means you have a different set of goals. And all of us have different goals and aspirations.
Great. And so out of respect for time, we're just going to ask 3 more questions, Gorick. So really appreciate you taking the extra time here. This question is around the imposter syndrome. So it comes from Cheryl Wayuma. Any advice on overcoming imposter syndrome and the effectiveness of having conversations and building connections? I think something that a lot of us can relate to.
Yeah, totally. It's a good question, and it's hard to overcome imposter syndrome through an answer over Zoom. I think so much of this is experiential. It's not like, let me clap twice now and poof, the imposter syndrome disappears from all of our lives. One thing that I found helpful and that someone else has taught me and that I sort of profiled in my book is the idea of just giving yourself credit for everything that you've done so far. So to get to where you are, to get into college was a big deal. To get through college was a big deal. To land the job that you've landed is a big deal. And often we don't give ourselves credit for these mini wins. I'll tell you the story of someone that I profiled in my book, someone who started off being at the bottom of, I believe it was their English class in college, but then they went up to their professor and they said, hey, I want to improve. Tell me everything I'm doing wrong. And over the course of the semester, went from bottom of the class to, I believe, top of the class. And this woman also became the only woman that this oil and gas company had hired. And in addition to that, was the only person from their college to be hired into this program. Typically, this company hired from a select number of schools. She was the only person from an outside school, a non-target school, that ended up making it in. And when she had these mini wins, she didn't necessarily give herself credit for any of them. I think maybe we as Figly students and professionals like to maybe downplay just how momentous these small wins are. And I don't even think of them as small wins. I mean, these are big wins. It's just that we often tend to overlook just how much we've overcome. Other people, someone like person A is outwardly successful, but they also have a lot that's tilted in their favor over someone like person B. So to start off with someone like person B who may not have as much of this social capital, to get to where you are is a big, big, big deal. So reminding yourself of that can be helpful. The second thing to be thinking in mind is when you're building relationships and having these conversations, often it can be helpful to start off with people that you're more comfortable with and then work your way up. So when I think about building relationships at work, it doesn't happen overnight that you walk into a room, you present your PowerPoint presentation, and everyone is nodding and smiling and approving of your ideas. That takes a long, long, long time. And what someone like person A often will do is they'll start off with one person. Maybe it's the person they sit beside, and they'll build that one-on-one relationship with them. And that one-on-one relationship leads to them asking for this coworker's opinion. This coworker, whether consciously or subconsciously, really sort of hyping them up in a meeting, them meeting a second person, that person now signing off on this work. And over the course of, it could take weeks, months, years, but over time, presenting for this entire group isn't so scary anymore, because they built these one-on-one relationships and gotten approval from each of these people. So actually the meeting isn't even a decision-making meeting. The decision has already been decided even before the meeting began, because they were able to have these one-on-one relationships. So it can be really daunting to feel like, wow, I just entered this new environment. I have 20 people who are strangers. They're all staring at me, judging me, and are gatekeepers to my ideas. No one goes from not knowing these 20 people to knowing these 20 people. It takes these one-on-ones. So starting off with the person who's closest to you, who can relate to you easiest, can help, because who knows, maybe you could go to a social event where you are meeting someone new in the presence of someone you already know. So it's now even less. I think one thing that I don't quite emphasize in the person A, person B scenario is that it actually gets easier over time as you're doing these, as you're applying some of these habits. So I hope that's helpful, but we can talk a lot more about this. I realize we're a little bit short on time.
So 2 things I got out of it was to give ourselves some more credit, but also take the smallest next step that you can take at that moment. Right?
So much more concise than how I put it. Thank you, Nancy.
Well, no, just because I've been listening to you. I guess one more question, right, David? I guess that's...
we can.
Okay, great. So this is, I think on another flip side is then at the interviewing, how would you describe resilience and overcoming issues, especially as first gen? We, like you said, we don't give ourselves more credit. So how would you handle that during interviews and it's in person and live?
Yeah, so I will mentally do something and I would physically do something. So mentally, I will tell myself that these aren't necessarily mistakes, they're learning opportunities. And your first interview is always going to bomb. I mean, I've bombed so many interviews before, but your first interview is always going to be the hardest. It's going to be the most cringeworthy. But it's those interviews that end up allowing you to perform better next time. And so this relates to the second thing that I do, which is more on the physical side, is if I'm lining up opportunities, I'll often start with the easiest, lowest stakes opportunity first. So if I'm setting up a networking call, for example, I will, and similar to the way that I answered the prior question, I'll maybe start off with someone I know first. And then I'll maybe move over to an organization that I feel more comfortable with, or I feel like is lower stakes. I can sort of practice there first, and then move on to the next one, the next one, and the next one, all the way through until I get to the really high stakes situations. I'll talk about this in the context of networking events as well, where this was pre-COVID. I remember walking up to a table and talking to someone, and in my view, embarrassing myself. But over the course of that conversation, I learned something from this person about this company, that, they were actually going through this acquisition. And it was in the news, and I hadn't done my research, but someone else did. But in that networking circle, I was the clueless looking one. However, I learned that piece of information. So the next time I talked to someone else, I was able to drop that piece of information. They were super impressed, not knowing that I had just embarrassed myself 5 seconds earlier, but learned it from a different group. And so this is maybe coming back to this idea of just kind of climbing up and using your prior, whether it's mistakes or embarrassments, as a launching point for your next opportunity. No one has to know. I think that's something that I also sort of remind myself of is no one has to know about this mistake. So for example, I could embarrass myself in front of David, but then I learned something from David that I can go to Nancy with. And Nancy might hopefully be impressed by me, even though I totally just embarrassed myself in front of David. And so we all do that. It's natural.
Awesome. Well, Gorick, thank you so much for answering all those questions, for going over. It really, truly has been an insightful opportunity for us to hear from you and all of you. So much value also in your book. I quickly wanted to share my screen just to cover a few more just kind of concluding thoughts here. For those of us, again, who it's your first time stepping into a webinar for Rise First, please connect more with us. Connect on our LinkedIn, our Facebook, Instagram. We also have a newsletter that goes out. So if you go online into our website and put in your email address, you'll get this weekly newsletter with opportunities for first-generation low-income students. So please, please, please follow more with us, connect with us. We love it. Second point to make here is, again, we're raffling off a few of Gorick's books. So please, you'll receive an email from Zoom from Rise First on how to on a post webinar survey. So please fill it out to have an opportunity to enter. And I also want to give Nancy an opportunity to kind of give a quick little shout out for Collective Success Network.
Yes, thank you. And same thing, if this is the first time you heard of the Collective Success Network, we're really glad you're able to join us on this. If you're on the East Coast, a really hot Sunday, we're having like a heat wave right now, so there's nowhere to go. But I would love to stay in contact, so you can follow us on Facebook, we're LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, but also visit our website. And we also have a bi-weekly newsletter. And hopefully by fall 2021, we could maybe meet in person, fingers crossed. And at that time, there are some mentorship program. One is more for underclassmen, just to learn how to navigate a lot of the things that Gorick talk about, like how do you introduce yourself? How do you make yourself relevant and competent and such? These are the topics of discussion. And then career focus is really for upperclassmen who kind of know their industry and role that they want to get into, and that they're going to be more technical into resume review, cover letter critique, and mock interview. And finally, we actually got a grant under the Eagle Social Justice Fund, and we're starting consortium chapter, meaning at some colleges, there might be not enough first-gen students to actually have a on-campus organization. So this will help bridge and bring together these universities that don't have a big enough first-gen population, but still have a CSN chapter, Collective Success Network chapter. So if you're interested, stay in contact or reach out to us, and we'll love to talk to you.
Great. And I know Gorick also has a survey that he wants to send out. He sent out the link earlier in the chat. Gorick, if you want to share that over, we can also include that in an email that we send out for more folks to fill that out. But again, it's been an honor, Nancy, first of all, for being my co-moderator in this and putting this event together. And Gorick, thank you truly so much for just spending some time with us this Sunday afternoon. It really, truly has been a really insightful opportunity for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I sincerely hope this can be the first of many conversations between us as a community, coming back to where we started, which is the importance of really just sparking that conversation. Hopefully you all by being here, we all by being here has sparked that opportunity where we've gone from stranger status to acquaintance status. This is the beginning of a relationship between us. So please, please, please reach out through my website, through LinkedIn. I'm here to help.
Awesome. And thank you all to all of you who were able to join on this Sunday afternoon as well. We really appreciate it, and stay tuned for more. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.